So hey everyone, it's Steven here, and before we begin today's discussion, I want to take a short moment to explain just what Deep Dive is all about. Some of you might know, I used to host Heart of the Matter on my own. We ran it very successfully for 4 seasons, but then came CNA's 25th anniversary, and we thought, let's shake things up a bit. It's a big birthday, let's change things a bit. So we retired Heart of the Matter. We came up with this new podcast called Deep Dive. It's, I guess you could call it the newer, younger, and more hip cousin to Heart of the Matter, And as we know, 2 is often better than 1. So now I have a co-host as well. Crispina, tell everyone a bit about yourself.
My name is Crispina, and I'm a senior editor with the audio team here.
You had your own podcast, it's just that wasn't on video.
Yes, I did, yes.
But so now you have to comb your hair a bit more, that's all.
Exactly. Okay, so the main reason we're doing this is because a lot of the issues in Singapore can be a little bit contentious, and they can be a little bit complex as well. So we felt that it was good to have different voices at the table, Steve. And I think that's what we want to bring to this new, version of Deep Dive. What are we talking about today?
We're going to talk about the stuff that's going to be involving our guest here, because it's all about flexible work arrangements. Working from home, working 3 days a week, work only between, 3 to 8 p.m. That's what comes to mind when we say that, right? But how flexible can the workplace really be? Because a tripartite work group announced that December 1st, all companies in Singapore must have a formal process.
We're going to unpack a few things, including the myths and the misconceptions around this whole thing.
Minister Gan, I'll start with you. Since you wanted to dive in, I'll throw you into the deep end, literally. Flexible work arrangements, especially since COVID, they've been around informally, and many of us are quite used to it. So why announce this now, and why are they sort of guidelines and not just law?
Well, actually, our journey with flexible work arrangements started 20 years ago when there were already work groups formed to look at how flexible work arrangements could support certain profiles of workers, especially caregivers and senior workers who might need some flexibility in their work arrangements in order for them to stay at work or come back to work. And actually, in 2014, we had a tripartite advisory on flexible work arrangements, and 2017 tripartite standard, all to nudge employers towards promoting and embracing flexible work arrangements. And then came COVID.
Right.
We saw companies out of health and safety reasons had to adopt flexibility in their work practices, especially work from home. So that accelerated the thinking and implementation about flexible work arrangements. And actually post-COVID, MOM as well as our tripartite partners continued to receive feedback from employers saying that, there are some employees and even job seekers asking if they could work from home, especially since they could do so during the COVID years. Why couldn't they continue? And there were employers who did not know how to respond to such requests. And also there were employees who came to MOM and said that, my employer is not listening, not understanding, basically not being reasonable with requests, which they felt were fair. So this set of guidelines, actually, we developed them because we want it to be a tool to help both employers and employees have a common understanding and reasonable approach towards implementing flexible work arrangements. Actually, it is about the process. It is a process that we hope that companies will have to consider flexible work arrangement requests from their employees. And still, it is the prerogative of the employers to decide from the business perspective whether it makes sense, whether it's sustainable to accede to the request.
You're saying quite a long time in the making. It's just that now is a slightly more formalized process to help companies along with it.
Probably accelerated by COVID as well, right? I mean, because people began to see the benefits of working flexibly and how it met both their professional as well as their personal needs, right?
And we also know that there are some employees who feel very helpless. They put in their requests and the employers don't reply to them. We think it is fair actually for employers to respond to the employees' requests on flexible work arrangements. So the guidelines come with templates and a recommended process that companies can use, employees can use to put in their requests to the employers. I would also want to say that going forward, we know that we have a aging population, we have an aging workforce, and more workers who are, caregivers will have this dual role, or, taking care of family and work at the same time. So flexible work arrangements, in a way, is to future-proof our workplaces. We want to actually maximize the workforce potential in Singapore and not have so many people drop out because of family caregiving reasons, or, because they're getting, older and so on.
But by putting these guidelines, and in Singapore, once you put guidelines, it's it's almost saying that you guys definitely need to think about it. It's not law yet, but think about it seriously. And companies, I mean, like one thing, when you first heard about this, what was your first reaction? Were you thinking, oh no?
Yes and no. So existingly in my company, at least in the Singapore office, we do have work from home and pretty flexible work arrangements. So when my team come to me and say that, they need to do this and that on this specific timing, and they would like to replace hours. So all of the requests, I actually say yes. Yeah, but because we are a service industry, so we do have clients we serve at office hours. So usually we are not a big team. We are a pretty small team. We have around 10 people in Singapore. A bit more in our Malaysia office. So when our clients look for us and some of our teammates are not around, so usually I'll have to step in to answer. I cannot tell, like as of now, I cannot tell my client that, my team is away at the bank. Yeah, he will reply to you at 8 p.m. How do we balance this?
The business needs versus your staff needs. Okay, on that point, right? I think one of the things that we saw coming up quite a lot in the comments was as SMEs. Okay, so you would be considered an SME, right? That as they have very little faith that SMEs will adopt these guidelines. Do you think that that's a misconception?
I do have friends who are business owners that still wants their team to be in office.
Do you know why?
I think easier to the nature of the business or the nature of the business owner, easier to find them.
So it's a preference.
It's a preference.
Is it a necessity? I guess what we're saying is, can some jobs... I mean, there are some jobs that you definitely need to physically be there.
Of course, yeah.
But there are other jobs, a lot of them that are in a bit of that in-between, right? So it means the employer needs to redesign the way the job is done, maybe take the calls from home, on the move, wherever.
Maybe change their views as well as to how...
So yes and no. I would think it depends on the individual, like the employee. So I'm just going to speak my mind. So it works for some, it doesn't work for some. Sometimes it's so hard, like, flexible work arrangement, work from home. It's just impossible to get them.
Impossible to get them, as in your staff has just disappeared. You can't find them, reach them because...
Yeah.
Okay.
So...
if I could just chime in at this point. Actually, this was the feedback that we received in our consultations with many groups of stakeholders, including employers, SMEs as well, when we were developing this set of guidelines. And actually, that's why in our guidelines, we clearly remind employees that they have to be responsible in their use of flexible work arrangements. Stay contactable if they are required to. And also understand that for employers, they have the prerogative to decide whether the flexible work arrangement that's being requested makes business sense, not just for the person who's asking for it, but for the co-workers, the rest of the team members, for the business and also for the clients. So if you have a business need for the workers to be in office all the time, this will be it, It has to be flexible work arrangement, whichever form it is, whether it's flexi place, flexi time, flexi load, it has to make business sense to be sustainable. And I hope that employers can use this set of guidelines to respond logically, objectively.
I suppose this is where HR comes in, right?
That's right.
Because you have to communicate exactly, right? One thing, I mean, if somebody comes and asks you, can I do this? And then they don't meet you have to talk about the objectives, right? Okay, so here's the deal. These are your objectives. These are the outcomes. You need to be contactable. So isn't that the conversation that...
I think absolutely, but I first want to just say we don't give enough credit to the SMEs, because in fact what Wan Ting just described is the informal or the non-formal approach, which is widely practiced, I think, amongst a lot of SMEs already. Right. And if you really look at the tripartite guidelines, it goes into very specific formal requests. So there will definitely be individuals who may need that special attention for formal requests, perhaps it's the season of the life that they are in, where they need to, take care of an elderly parent, or maybe they want to spend more time with the children. And under those circumstances, then you can adjust.
Yeah, but shouldn't they be having that conversation instead of filling out a form? So my point is, why do we need a form to say, boss, I need time off?
Indeed.
Right?
So that's a very
exactly.
good point, right? So first and foremost, when you have a form, you have a process, right? And one of the things we in IHRP try to encourage companies is always look at having good human capital practices. So good practices comes obviously with good processes. But think of it another way as well. It's kind of like a form. A form provides clarity, transparency, right? And both sides can actually have an alignment of what actually is the expectations. Exactly that.
I had a look at the form.
Yep.
I quite like that form. You know why? Because it made me think carefully about why I am making this request.
And
In a way, because otherwise I would just go to one thing and say one thing. Can I just work 3 days a week? You understand what I mean?
Okay.
It's quite helpful to me.
the form pushes both parties, employers and employees, to think hard about the reasons.
Yes.
And that raises responsibility, actually both sides, right? And I think that is really what we want to accomplish.
Yeah, and I would also add that actually for companies like Ting, where you already have an existing process, whether it's informal or formal, you should just carry on with it. The guidelines, the templates in there will not be useful, will not have to be used. We are also very conscious that we do not want to
Make it
unnecessarily
onerous,
increase administrative load and resources for companies to be able to use these guidelines. So who will find this guidelines, the templates useful? It will be those companies that totally do not have any flexible work arrangements and don't have a process for their employees to make such requests, informal or not, right? And I would say that by and large, many companies in Singapore, including SMEs, already have such process. So not to worry. The formal template, is a very deliberate one. It is really to be exercised in cases where employees feel that they have no way of getting through to their managers
So
or
in a way,
employers.
you're wanting to help and say, this is the thought process you should go through when you are approaching this situation. But I guess the fact that there's a form scares people off sometimes because they think it's formalized, it's in black and white. Companies have to be very careful. Then they'll get their legal team to look at it and things like that.
In case there is a dispute.
Exactly.
That's a very interesting point, and I thought maybe I want to deep dive a little bit on this. Psychological safety, I think, is something we underrate and underestimate in organizations, whether large or small. And in IHRP, one of the things we did was we took on board FWA quite seriously, because 60% of our workforce is actually women, and they have needs, right? And some of them,
Actually, men also have lah.
True. That's true.
Women have more, I would argue.
Let's
I look
not go
at my
there. That's a debate we
demographics.
will definitely lose.
No, but what do you mean by psychological safety when it comes
so one
to
of the
this?
one interesting comment my HR told me was, it was a policy that's been there for a long time, but nobody thought about it, nobody raised it, and then some of them may think that if I want to spend more time with my children, I should quit my job and then just get out of the working ecosystem. But then we went back and spoke to them and said, hey, there's FWA here. You tell us when you need it, and then let's work it out. And we don't just do it independently with the individual. We take the matter to the team, we discuss and say, okay, how can we now reconfigure your work, right? Not just for you, but potentially for the team as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunities that we perhaps want to think a little bit harder, whether it's large or small companies. Do you maybe need to redesign your workflow a little, right? And how will that actually allow you to seize new opportunities?
But as we know, change is always difficult.
It's always difficult.
That
yes.
sounds like a lot of work, to be honest.
You're asking the companies to redesign the way
a
they
job.
work, right?
That's tough, right?
Well, we did speak to quite a number of companies, and actually the feedback was that for those companies that want to hire talent and retain their good staff, they have to seriously think about flexible work arrangement provisions. Job Street, for example, told us that last year in Singapore, job vacancies that were advertised with flexible work arrangement provisions attracted 2 to 3 times more applicants
Right.
than those that did not.
Okay.
So I think companies and HR, they are very aware of these trends. These are not trends that we could control. It's actually worldwide trends too. And I think companies that are short of talent, that are short of workers, will want to be also on board this flexible work arrangement, so that they can have their fair share of talent too.
One thing, do you feel that if you have a very talented staff and they came to you and said, okay, by the way, it's not just flexi work, right? As in work from home, it's also load, it's also place, time, etc. And so if you have a talented staff, would you, think of even redesigning the job to keep that person?
Yes, and I do have a question actually. So, it differs from individual to individual. There are some, at least based on my experience and my friends' businesses' experience, some people can have more flexible workload, and you trust them to get the job delivered. But there are some that might not be able to. But it just seems not fair to give it to a certain group of people and not the other group. So is the burning question in my head, how do I do that such that it's fair for the entire team and it's still fair for the co-workers?
So you brought up a really, really good point. And I'm going to take the word that you use, it's called trust, right? And trust, I think, is absolutely critical. And it's not something you can measure, in a formula. It takes time. You have to spend a lot of time talking, communicating, and sometimes it requires you to just open and frank. Flexible work arrangement should work definitely for one where you definitely trust the employee and you allow the employee to go, and there's clear guidelines on how to manage expectations both sides. So I think that must be the starting point. And obviously, you might want to try it out a bit. And if it doesn't work, then bring the employee back, have another open conversation, and then see how you can work out either an alternative. And sometimes, in business, you have to make difficult decisions. You have to say, okay, this doesn't work for you, right? And therefore, you have to come back. And that really is the fundamental to the guideline, right? It has to boil down to the business decision, right? What will support your business productivity, the promise you make to your customers, etc.
But all this sounds good in theory, but when you have to tell, when John says, how come Lisa doesn't have to come in every Wednesday and I do, and you're going to tell John, you're just not as good a worker. To tell him to his face, that's going to be really hard. And he would say, well, then I don't want to work here anymore.
Yeah,
so you might lose the person, even though he's 50% productivity, you know? So
that's absolutely right? And people are complex. I remember a very senior HR person said, HR is very interesting. It's a lot of grey in between, right?
Yeah.
Because you're dealing with people, you're dealing with emotions. But back to you, Steve, what's the alternative? Right? If you are in a sector or a business where you are dealing with people and majority of your workforce is actually humans, as opposed to capital or equipment, then I think it's an inevitable cost that you have to invest in.
I almost imagine one thing you should go to, some SMEs will say, okay guys, here's the spiel. We all know about this flexible work arrangement. Some of you will benefit from it more than others. Life is unfair, deal with it. It's almost that kind of a conversation,
Well, I'm sure we can frame it.
I mean, with nicer words, but in short, that's what you're saying,
in
right?
fact, within the guidelines, we also advise employees not to compare across.
Right?
But so employers can actually cite that within the guidelines.
Okay, another thing I wanted to get into is this myth that it only applies to certain industries. And I don't think that's
Can a
quite
nurse
accurate.
have a flexi
exactly. Because
teacher?
there's flexi time, flexi load, right? So a nurse can do a flexi load, for example.
Yeah.
So she could do lesser or something like that. So that's another thing, right? It's broad enough. And it shouldn't discount people like teachers, doctors, nurses, etc. in frontline, even people who need to answer to consumer queries, right?
That's right. If I could add, there are actually many permutations. It could be, once a month I need to bring my mom for a medical appointment. And, for that day, in that month, could I come in 1 hour or 2 hours later? But I will make it up. I still get the job done. That is called flexible work arrangement. For teachers, especially those with newborns, they might have to send their babies or their young children to childcare in the morning. Could they come in 1 or 2 hours later than the rest of the teachers? But within the school, they will need to find somebody else to cover the initial hours. And the teacher still gets the lessons taught. And it's about teamwork. It's about understanding between the co-workers with the supervisors. So there's no, I would say prescriptive, flexible work arrangements that we are advocating. In fact, like Crispina said, there's flexi load, flexi time, flexi place. And really, and there's so many permutations, if we just allow our imagination and be practical about understanding what are the individual needs, what are the business requirements, then there will be many possibilities.
So I think if we're open to the idea, and like you mentioned earlier, if we really value the worker, we'll find a way to keep them on, even if it means allowing them to work offsite at a certain point in time. But then the employees will be a bit concerned. They're thinking, does this come at any expense? Does that mean I might earn less money? Does that mean my contract
not be promoted?
Yeah, I might not be promoted. I have less days of leave.
That's the other concern people have, right? Like, if I ask for less hours, for example, even though my objective's the same, I produce the same work, but maybe because you don't see me, compared to somebody else, maybe I might be not promoted.
Well, maybe we could ask one thing. If, within your team, you have a member who is able to still do the same amount of work, still stay productive, but actually comes to office fewer hours than another co-worker, would you change the remuneration package?
No, I wouldn't. My worry is if this person is leading a team, how would the team react to it? I do have team members who are like that, just different work hours. But with the team, I think communication, how do we communicate? And there will be comments on, I want to do it the same. So younger employees or newer employees will come to me and tell me they are a late night owl. Then they will oversleep, come in, waiting for a parcel at home. That kind of
waiting for a parcel.
That kind of arrangement. So it's like opening a wormhole and with different requests.
They can come and work here at CNA. We have shifts that start at 2 a.m. in the morning. Yeah, they can come and newsroom is always open 24/7.
One thing you were quoted in an article to say that if everybody wants to work remote, then cost becomes a factor for you, right? I mean, you could easily just hire somebody from another country, Malaysia, for example. Maybe explain to us, could that be an implication from a business point of view?
Okay, so a bit of background about my company to explain. So I actually started the Malaysia office first before I started the Singapore office.
Okay.
I'm still quite a young company, so since 2017. So hiring in Singapore, it's very expensive. Yeah, hiring in Singapore is very expensive. But we still do have a team here. How we choose whether to hire here or overseas, it's we want our client-facing team to be here. Yeah, because we want the face time.
Yeah.
And there are certain skills, at least in my industry, that I would say it's better to hire in Singapore because the quality of work and the level of knowledge is higher here. Yeah, so there will still be staff that we will want to hire here as compared to our Malaysia
But are you
office.
concerned that this is going to make it more difficult to do that?
After COVID, everybody, some of my clients started to prefer video call. Don't need FaceTime. So they are thinking about, might as well then I get an overseas agency.
Right.
Yeah. So might as well I get an overseas agency. So things like that. So partly is because how our clients will react to it also. If they are okay with no FaceTime, then my worry is also, then will they be thinking of, if
Switching to another company.
Yeah. And
Okay.
and the reason why I thought about it is I think at least hiring the younger batch generation, maybe at least I do not know how to manage them lah. Yeah, because we do have work in office days. They can come in at 11 and just don't.
You don't say anything. You don't
say
say where.
anything.
Hello.
Yeah. Or late for client meetings. They can come in 45 minutes late for client meetings.
Okay,
Or
okay.
the 3 work in office days. like it's just a small percentage, but it's just like the thought of it is like, wow, how do I how do I handle?
And they
it's
still want flexi work arrangement.
Yeah. So, being responsible
Yeah.
when they use flexible work arrangements, actually, that's quite key. And that trust, right,
Yes.
that you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier on, Lam also emphasized.
So
I think that's really
absolutely.
important.
And we don't want to micromanage. Like I'm never a micromanage person. So it's just, wow, if there's different variations of it.
I thought that was a very good point, right? Moskan said, and maybe this is something you can use and show. The guidelines does say employees should be responsible. So maybe think of it, reframe that conversation, and say, as much as we want to give you flexibility, we also expect some degree of responsibility, and the guideline does give that avenue for employers like yourself to capitalize on that point.
I guess there's also the concern that some people would try to just take advantage of
Absolutely.
this FWA to have an easier life, so to
Yeah.
speak, right? Not everybody wants a win-win. Some
Yeah.
people just want to work less and get paid the same,
Yeah.
right? So,
But I think also, we must be mindful not to make the exception the norm.
Yeah.
And I feel that in those kind of situations, then I think, a more critical conversations needs to happen between you and the staff to explain expectations. And I'm sure you have a culture you are building. I mean, you're a young company, so obviously you need to build culture. So one of the things we also hear, depending on the type of companies, some organizations encourage people to come back only because they want to build a culture, and culture building requires face time and connection.
Quite a lot of people are talking about HR and how HR
glad to
needs
hear that.
HR needs to up its game, because you don't just have more processes now, more forms, but potentially more complex administrative hurdles, like one thing was talking about, right? So you might have a team of 30, different types of combinations. Do you foresee that this will be hard before it gets better?
So maybe I'll tackle this in two ways. First of all, HR needs to up its game. I think everyone in Singapore needs to up its game, because the world is changing and all our skills needs to change, right? So I wanted to perhaps think of this in the different contexts, but definitely the world of work, the world of interaction with people has changed.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's so many more variables factored in. The legislative landscape, the labor landscape has changed in Singapore. So clearly the quality of the HR professional needs to go up. And in our HRP, we do work to raise the quality and help them progress.
But are we
these
saying that HR
capabilities.
needs to also change a bit of the way they look at things? Because this requires quite a paradigm shift in the way we approach, what is current HR policies.
No, obviously, I think HR needs to be on the front seat. They have to take a front seat and really drive some of these conversations, work with the business, of course, and raise the adoptions of some of these best practices in organizations. But I think HR alone cannot solve the problem, because ultimately the worker has to deal with the supervisor and the line manager. So we want to see HR as, I want to borrow some technology terms like Microsoft Copilot. I think HR should be a co-pilot together with the business leaders to drive some of these transformations in organization, adopting some of these practices.
Well, so actually HR also needs to be supported, right?
That's
It needs to up the game. We did meet a few companies that told us they needed additional tools to schedule their workers, especially if they're coming in at different times and, they have more than 50 workers. They need the managers, the supervisors, they will find themselves being overwhelmed, if they have to figure out who's coming in at what time and all that.
Yeah.
So there are grants, productivity solutions grant, that companies could apply for if they need additional IT systems or tools to help them, HR especially. We also have consultancy services to advise companies on how they can change some of their job processes or equip their managers in order to be able to do performance appraisal and still be able to keep the businesses going. So help is available. TAFET, for example, I think every month they're going to run clinics and briefings. Our Tripartite Partners, SNAF, NTUC likewise will be rolling out a lot of support and templates, case studies and so on, all to help employers and employees to be able to navigate this.
And there's still time. I mean, it hasn't, there's still a few months to go. So I think the reminder here is that companies shouldn't just be scared of the whole concept, right? But, discuss it a bit more, find out a bit more, and look at how your company may be able to adopt it in different ways. And it could be win-win for everyone.
Yeah, there are quite a few examples actually in the MOM deck of companies who have done it successfully.
Is MediaCorp there? Because actually, I have to admit...
No, MediaCorp is not there.
But you know what? Minister just missed it, I think. But she meant to put it in there. Because
there
actually...
are lab tech companies, NTUC Income,
but we
those
have
kinds of things.
a fully flexi option. I mean, our CEO has said before that you don't have to come in. Your team leader will decide whether you need to come in or not.
That's right.
You want to work whatever, work it out with them. And in fact, we have done better with this arrangement in terms of productivity and returns and KPIs and all that versus than when we were all in the office pre-COVID.
Exactly. Yeah. So
it can
there's
be
a correlation, right,
Yeah.
between people who are happy and productivity. And therefore, eventually, business, outcomes, right?
Yeah, because if you have a happy home, happy family, your life is happier, you work better, you're happier at work, you're nicer to your colleagues, the whole world is a happier place. Gotta be optimistic, come on, right?
That's a very optimistic. Okay, that's really optimistic. Okay, any last words from our guests? Maybe Aslam, we'll start with you.
No, so I think I like to think of this as an opportunity for organizations to raise the practices in their human capital practices in their organizations. So one of the things we always encourage is you must have a process, because a process gives transparency and a process helps parties in the organization, employers and employees, to have clarity. So we are quite encouraged with this move. We think it's quite fair.
Yep.
I mean, from a HR community standpoint, don't really see this as a major impediment. I mean, HR itself is actually encouraging this in the organizations.
Antik?
I think for me, it's like SMEs and myself will have to really take these few months to think through how can we adjust certain processes such that we don't drop our service quality to our clients and still give more flexibility to our team.
I just want to reiterate a few points. Flexible work arrangements is more than work from home. Flexible work arrangements does not mean less work. Flexible work arrangements also doesn't mean lower productivity. And most of all, actually, these guidelines on flexible work arrangement requests is not about demanding that every workplace must have flexible work arrangements. Well, I think it's important that we try to generate and enable win-win solutions between the employers and the employees. See flexible work arrangement as an opportunity, both for the employer as well as the employee. For the employer, it's about attracting talent, retaining your good staff. For the employees, it's about being able to manage your work as well as your personal commitments. And this is going to be so important for Singapore because we will have an aging population, we will have more caregivers. We need to build more inclusive workplaces so that our workforce potential can be maximized for the longer term.
Yeah, and in turn, this will also have greater returns because if you're a happier person, you're home earlier, then our total fertility rate might also go up. All part of our forward SG plan, right?
Okay, if only life was so simple.
In our line of work in production, actually, we've had this option of flexi because it just doesn't make sense for me to sit in the office all the time, So I think for different jobs, it's just about rethinking how you approach the job. And if everyone is open to the idea, I'm sure we can find a way.
I couldn't manage, the demands of the job, and having a little baby at the time, I eventually quit.
Oh.
So when I read about the guidelines, I was actually really glad, for all the caregivers out there, there's this, formalized process now on the table that they can tap on. So I think it's going to be tough for employers, especially small companies. But I think in overall, it's a good thing for me. Thanks to my podcast team, Tiffany Ang, Joanne Chan, Junaini Johari, Saya Win, and sound mixing is by Ken Delbridge. Till we meet you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.